Hello and welcome to a new Detective Squirrel Investigates video. This video is on the Chernobyl disaster. For the 43,000 population of the Ukrainian city of Pripyat, the 25th of April 1986 was a bright, sunny, warm spring day. They were not prepared for what happened. Just after 1:20 a.m. on the 26th, 3 kilometers away, at the Vladimir Ilyich power plant in Chernobyl, the night crew were preparing for a test that would improve efficiency. The safeties were turned off and the uranium rods were removed from the reactor. Suddenly power began to drop at a drastic rate. The operators had to do something, and they only had one option: press a button. Press a simple button which would drop the rods back into the reactor. They had no idea what that would do. They heard a series of explosions from the reactor, then a much larger explosion. The lid of the reactor, the 1,200-ton lid, was blown through the roof of the reactor building and came crashing back down, landing at the side of the now exposed reactor core. All the operators knew for sure was that there was a fire, and so firefighters were called into the fight to fight the blaze. Operators were sent to the reactor's hall to check if the pumps were working. But when they got to the hall that housed Reactor 4, they were shocked to be able to see the sky through a hole where the roof used to be. Their dosimeters recorded just 20 roentgens. A roentgen was the measurement of radiation used by the Soviets at the time. Measurements were usually in milliroentgens. Continuous exposure equaling more than 2 roentgens over a year was considered potentially a lethal dose. At 20 roentgens, a lethal dose would be reached in a few days. But the reading was only 220, as that was the maximum for the dosimeters. They were given access to better dosimeters that maxed out at 100. In fact, at the base of the remains of the Reactor 4 building, the reading was more than 2,000. A lethal dose would take no more than 15 minutes exposure. The firemen arrived at 1:30 a.m. The fires on the roofs of the buildings had pretty much been extinguished by 5 a.m. But that meant firefighters were exposed for as much as 3.5 hours in a zone where 15 minutes was a death sentence. The firemen were taken by ambulance to the hospital in Pripyat. Their protective clothing was stripped off them and was sealed in the basement, where they remain still today, still highly radioactive. 2 of the firefighters died that same day. Igor Kostin, a photographer for the Novosti agency, called a friend who had a helicopter to take him to the power plant to get photos. His photos are the first of the devastation. As they fly above and Igor takes his photos, he realizes they are looking directly into the exposed core. Igor has a metallic taste in his mouth, and after maybe a dozen photos, the radiation causes his equipment to jam. At 9:30 a.m., more than 7 hours after the disaster, President Mikhail Gorbachev is contacted in Moscow. He is told that there has been a minor accident at the plant, but there has been no explosion. Cameras were in Pripyat around 10:30 a.m. The footage shows white flashes on the film. The white flashes was evidence of the high levels of radiation already in the city. Colonel Vladimir Grebenerik, head of the Pripyat Civil Defense Force, was given the task of evacuating the city. The order for evacuation came in 30 hours after the accident. Buses arrived to take the people away. They were given a short time to pack up for the 3 days they were told they were going to be away from their homes. They've never been able to return. A committee led by Valery Legasov moved into the Pripyat Hotel. On the 28th of April, high radiation levels were discovered in Sweden. After checking that none of their nuclear power stations had suffered an accident, it was concluded that the radiation had been carried in the clouds. The source was soon deduced to be somewhere inside the Soviet Union. Satellite images showed that the source was in fact Chernobyl, the destroyed reactor 4 clearly seen on the satellite image. The Swedish government contacted President Gorbachev. This was the first time that he was alerted to the severity of the issue, told by the Swedish government, not his own generals or the people in charge of the investigation on the ground. The committee decided that a mixture of sand and boron will be dropped onto the site by helicopter, as boron absorbs radiation. Helicopters and personnel are pulled off the Afghan front to help. The helicopters are fitted with dosimeters which register 500 roentgens. But again, that is because that is the maximum those dosimeters went up to. It was believed the true reading would be over 1,000. So better dosimeters were fitted. The readings came back at more than 3,500. 110 sorties of boron and sand are dropped during the first day, and an additional 300 on the second. The committee staying in the Pripyat Hotel eats the local food, drinks the local water. Food and water that they don't realise is already contaminated. 6 days after the explosion, to try and keep the public from knowing the severity and seriousness of the incident, they decide to continue with May Day celebrations in Kiev. Igor Kostin's photos of the celebrations are all that I've known of. All other films and photographs are missing from the archives. Again, Igor Kostin's photos show evidence of high levels of radiation. A week after the accident, the evacuation zone around the site is increased to 30 kilometres diameter. Rainfall in North Wales shows high levels of radiation. Even today, some grassy hillsides in North Wales register high levels of radiation. Meanwhile, the French government deny radioactive cloud reached them. Despite their denial, high radiation is evident in grasslands of southern France, and the cases of thyroid cancer has increased in France and Corsica. So the Russians didn't have a monopoly on lies. Recognising another potential problem, a team is sent inside to find a way to send a camera, thermometer and dosimeter into the reactor core. If the molten core melts through the concrete floor, it could react with the water laid below the reactor from the firefighters putting out the fires on the roof, and the water remaining in the cooling tanks underneath. If the molten mass melts through, it would cause a huge thermo explosion, one that would be between 3 and 5 megatons. One that would damage reactors 2 and 3 and possibly 1. The result would be a disaster that would devastate everything in a huge area. The city of Minsk, 320 kilometers away, would be leveled. The resultant radiation would make much of Europe uninhabitable. The probe they sent in gave the first image of the now infamous elephant's foot, a huge lump of molten magma that had already melted through the concrete floor. Both the temperature and radiation levels were only reported as astronomical. There was only one solution. Volunteer divers would have to go into the highly contaminated water, find the valves in the dark to pump out the water from the tanks. They succeeded, but the core was still burning too hot. So the next stage they decided to drop lead into the reactor. During the drops of lead, at least 600 helicopter pilots were fatally exposed to radiation. 20 years after, children were found to have illnesses caused by the lead vapour. But the fight was not over. Even with the tanks emptied, there was still a chance that the magma could melt through its way through the ground to the aquifer that provides water for all of Ukraine, Belarus and much of Russia. Major Nikolai Tarakanov, commander of the ground troops, calls in miners from Tula. Their task to dig a tunnel 12 metres down and 150 metres long to build a room underneath the reactor 30 metres square to hold a liquid nitrogen refrigeration system. The temperature in the tunnel as they dug was 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. They would drink water from the pools in the tunnel. As they worked, one miner accidentally swallowed a grain of contaminated sand. He died later the same day. They finished the tunnel in 1 month and 4 days. 240 of the miners died before they reached 40 years of age. None of the miners' deaths appear on any official figures. On the 14th of May, President Gorbachev made a TV appearance, for the first time informing the Soviet people what had happened at Chernobyl. Then the job came of cleaning, liquidating the site. Radioactive graphite and other dangerous materials had to be gathered and pushed or thrown into the reactor site for outside the building. Bulldozers covered in lead were controlled remotely to push materials in. On the roof, robots were used, but the extremely high levels of radiation caused the robots to go haywire. One launched itself off the roof into the void. There was no other choice. Bio-robots, men in handmade lead suits, would have to run onto the roof, pick up pieces, throw them into the void and run back in. Igor Kostin was one of 4 photographers allowed to take photos of the operation. The liquidators received a certificate and a 100 ruble bonus. It is estimated that the liquidators were exposed to between 10,000 and 12,000 roentgens per hour. By October in 1986, the sarcophagus, the metallic concrete structure built to actually cover the exposed reactor, was completed. Liquidators raised the Soviet flag in celebration. On the 22nd of November, the first snows of the winter fell on top of the sarcophagus. The designers saw that as a sign to prove that it was working. By that time, reactors 1, 2 and 3 were back up and running. The liquid nitrogen refrigeration system was never installed. Igor Kostin spent 2 months of every year in hospital due to the effects of the radiation he was exposed to, until his death on the 9th of June 2015. He was the last of the 4 photographers who covered the liquidation. Of the 500,000 liquidators, more than 20,000 died. More than 200,000 were left disabled. The official figures record just 59 deaths. Ukrainian reporter Alla Yaroshinskaya found an official 600-page report. According to the report, 10,198 people were hospitalized by the 12th of May 1986. But also she found in a piece called Decree Number 12, which took the previous acceptable rate of radiation and increased it by 5. So suddenly the acceptable levels were 5 times higher than previous. In August 1986, a conference was held, led by Hans Blix. The conference was held behind closed doors. No reporters allowed. Valery Legasov spoke passionately for 3 hours. He estimated some 40,000 deaths would be directly contributable to Chernobyl. The conference members, including Hans Blix, refused to accept that figure. At the end of the conference, the official figure was revised to just 4,000. In 2005, that was still the official death toll. On the 27th of April 1988, on the 2nd anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster, Valery Legasov took his own life. He was 51. Anatomopathologist Yuri Bandashevsky produced a report that the effects of radiation could lead to a death toll of 8 million over 40 years. He was imprisoned, his report destroyed. On release from prison, he was still under house arrest in 2005, but it didn't stop him from releasing his findings. 1,152 children were diagnosed with thyroid cancer between 1986 and 2002 in Minsk alone. More than 300,000 children had genetic deformations. Chernobyl did show the world the dangers of nuclear. The Russian SS-18, known as the Tsar, was capable of producing an explosion 100 times greater than Chernobyl, and they had nearly 3,000 of them. It still took until late 1997, 11.5 years after the disaster, before all countries, except India, signed the Nuclear Disarmament Agreement. By 2001, all the reactors at Chernobyl were decommissioned, but weather erosion had started to damage the sarcophagus. It was designed to last 20 to 30 years, but it was built in a hurry. In 2005, the readings from the base of the sarcophagus were still 100 times higher than safe levels. So a new structure, larger, would need to be built. A number of companies from various countries put in bids to build the new safe confinement. Strangely, a French company won the bid, despite the French government still denying ever being affected by the actual cloud of radiation that came from Chernobyl. Stranger still is that the dome construction and the rail system to moved the completed structure over the sarcophagus was closer to the design presented by a British company, a company that was denied the contract. The new safe confinement was completed in 2018 and is apparently designed to last 100 years. It is higher than the Statue of Liberty and is larger than Wembley Stadium. It is estimated that the safe deconstruction of the old sarcophagus will take till around 2045. Then we will still have much work to do. Of course, we have recently had the HBO series, which of course, because the TV and movie execs insist on it, over-dramatises much of it. It's not necessary. The real-life events were dramatic enough. Why over-dramatising? But what happened that night? Well, the uranium rods were tipped with graphite. The graphite, when re-entering the reactor, caused the temperature to rise rapidly. This was a known fault in the design, as a minor incident had occurred in an identical reactor near Minsk. None of the operators were told about the problem. I would like to take this moment to remember the heroic firemen, liquidators, and all who have given their lives to Chernobyl. This is Detective Squirrel, out.